It was a quiet afternoon in a calm neighborhood. The sun shone warmly, casting soft light over the rows of neatly kept houses. Trees lined the streets and the gentle rustle of leaves filled the air. In one yard, a woman was carefully tending to her garden. She moved slowly and deliberately, planting new flowers and trimming the hedges with care. Her hands were gentle but steady, showing years of experience with the soil and the plants. She seemed entirely at peace, lost in the simple joy of working with the earth. From the street, a patrol car slowly drove by. The officer inside scanned the area, observing the peaceful neighborhood. His attention was drawn to the woman in the garden. Something about her presence caught his eye, though she was simply doing what seemed like an ordinary activity. The officer pulled the car over, got out, and walked toward her. His steps were firm and his expression carried authority, but there was also a hint of tension, as if he expected trouble. The woman noticed the officer approaching but did not stop her work immediately. She straightened slightly and gave a polite nod, acknowledging him. She was calm, her face relaxed, showing no sign of fear or hostility. She continued her work while observing the officer carefully. There was a quiet confidence in the way she held herself, a sense that she was comfortable in her own space and in control of the situation. The officer came closer and cleared his throat, speaking in a firm voice. He asked the woman what she was doing and whether she lived there. His words were polite enough on the surface, but the underlying tone carried suspicion. He was on guard, trained to notice any unusual activity, but he was also reacting to assumptions that were not fully informed. The woman looked up, meeting his gaze steadily, and explained that she was tending to her garden. She smiled slightly, her voice calm and even. She answered his questions honestly, showing no signs of defensiveness. As the conversation began, a few neighbors peeked from their windows, curious about the interaction. Some slowed down while walking their dogs, glancing at the scene from a safe distance. The atmosphere held a quiet tension, a mix of normalcy disrupted by the unexpected confrontation. The officer continued to ask questions, seeking to understand why she was outside. He was doing his job, but he also felt a slight unease. Her confidence and calmness were not what he expected in someone he had assumed might be suspicious. The woman remained polite and composed, explaining her gardening routine and how she enjoyed spending time outdoors in the afternoon. She spoke about the flowers she was planting, the care she gave to her plants, and how the garden brought her a sense of peace. Her words were simple, yet they carried warmth and authenticity. She treated the officer with respect, despite the confrontation, and made no effort to argue or escalate the situation. The officer listened, but his training made him cautious. He asked for identification as protocol required. The woman reached calmly into her bag and produced the necessary documents. As he examined them, a subtle change crossed his face. There was confusion, then a dawning realization that perhaps he had misjudged the situation. Yet he did not show it openly. Instead, he maintained a professional tone, asking a few more routine questions. The interaction was brief, but each moment was weighted with the tension of assumptions and the reality of an innocent, everyday activity. The garden itself was vibrant and colorful, with flowers in full bloom. The woman's care for the plants was evident in the neat rows, the healthy leaves, and the careful arrangement of the garden beds. The contrast between the tranquility of the scene and the tension of the confrontation made the moment feel delicate, almost fragile. It was a reminder of how ordinary life could be interrupted by unexpected events, even in the most peaceful settings. The officer finally seemed to relax slightly, though he remained cautious. He returned the documents and thanked her politely, though the situation had clearly made an impression on him. The woman nodded, continuing her gardening, showing that she was unaffected by the brief disruption. Her composure and dignity left a subtle mark, hinting that she carried a presence that commanded respect without force. Neighbors began to return to their routines, some shaking their heads at the unusual encounter, others quietly impressed by the woman's calm under scrutiny. The officer walked back to his car, taking a moment to reflect on the brief but revealing interaction. The sun continued to shine, the garden remained vibrant, and the neighborhood slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. In that small moment, an ordinary afternoon became a subtle lesson in observation, assumptions, and human dignity. The woman's patience and calmness had quietly challenged the officer's initial judgments, setting the stage for the events that would follow. Both the officer and the woman were aware, in different ways, that something significant had occurred, even if it was only visible in the silent understanding between them. As she resumed her gardening, the woman worked with renewed focus, aware of the eyes that had been on her but undisturbed by them. Her flowers and plants seemed to thrive under her care, mirroring her own strength and resilience. The officer, meanwhile, remained in the car for a moment longer, reflecting on the encounter and the unexpected perspective it had given him. The quiet neighborhood returned to its calm state, but the memory of the brief confrontation lingered. The woman continued her gardening, the flowers standing tall and bright under the afternoon sun. The officer drove away slowly, his thoughts stirred by the unexpected lesson in humility and human dignity. The afternoon carried on, ordinary to any other observer, yet profoundly meaningful to those who had been part of it. It was a reminder that even small everyday moments could reveal deeper truths about respect, assumptions, and the quiet strength of character. The afternoon continued with a strange mix of calm and tension. The woman returned to her gardening, carefully arranging the flowers in neat patterns while occasionally glancing at the street. She noticed the officer had paused near his car watching her. There was a quiet curiosity in his posture, and though his presence was official, it carried a personal weight. He seemed unsure now, caught between his duty and the realization that perhaps his initial assumptions had been off. He started walking back toward her, this time with a less abrupt approach. His voice remained firm but carried a softer tone. He asked her to clarify her presence once more. The woman stopped her work, wiped her hands on a cloth, and looked at him directly. She explained again, calmly and politely, that she was tending her garden, something she enjoyed daily. Her voice had a measured rhythm, not hurried or defensive, but steady enough to show that she expected to be treated with respect. The officer nodded slowly, trying to process the situation. He asked for more information, questions that were routine in his line of duty but now felt uncomfortable. Each word seemed to reveal the officer's growing awareness that his earlier actions might have been misguided. He asked if she lived in the house, and she confirmed that she did, describing the house as her home. There was a brief pause, a moment of unspoken understanding that the assumptions made had been unfair. Neighbors passing by could feel the tension, sensing that this was no ordinary interaction. Some slowed their steps. Others stopped to observe discreetly from a distance. The air seemed charged with curiosity, and yet the woman's calm demeanor countered the tension. She spoke of her garden, explaining the types of flowers she planted and how each plant required care and patience. Her words were simple, yet they painted a vivid picture of her love for her space and her life. The officer listened, still cautious, but there was a subtle shift in his expression. He was starting to realize the disconnect between his assumptions and reality. The woman's calmness was a gentle mirror, showing him the impact of approaching someone with preconceived notions. He tried to maintain professionalism, but internally he felt the stirrings of regret and unease. At this moment, the woman leaned slightly forward, demonstrating a small gesture of patience and openness. She made no sudden movements, no gestures that could escalate the situation. Her composure was quiet but powerful, reminding the officer and anyone watching that true authority could exist without force or aggression. She continued to answer his questions, each response delivered with clarity and poise. The officer, now visibly more relaxed but still alert, asked her for identification again. She reached into her bag with ease, producing the necessary documents. The officer took them, glancing over the papers carefully. He noticed her attention to detail, the calm confidence in her demeanor and the subtle dignity that seemed to fill the space between them. He felt a mix of admiration and discomfort, realizing that his initial approach had been unnecessarily confrontational. The officer asked a few more routine questions, trying to regain a sense of control over the interaction. The woman answered with honesty, explaining her gardening habits and the hours she typically spent outdoors. She spoke about the satisfaction of seeing her plants thrive, about the patience and care that gardening required, and how it connected her to something larger than herself. Her words were simple, yet they carried weight, conveying the depth of her character without needing to assert it. The officer began to sense the scrutiny of the neighbors, and he felt the quiet judgment of the community on his actions. Each question he asked now seemed more calculated, less instinctive, as if he were weighing the potential for error. The woman, however, remained unaffected by the surrounding attention, focused on her garden and maintaining her calm composure. The subtle contrast between her groundedness and his growing self-awareness highlighted the imbalance in their initial interaction. As the conversation unfolded, the woman offered a gentle smile, acknowledging the human tension without escalating it. She spoke of her daily routine, how she enjoyed spending her time nurturing her garden and the simple joys it brought her. Her words were not defensive but illuminating, allowing the officer to see her as a person rather than an assumption or stereotype. Each sentence seemed to chip away at the officer's earlier judgments, revealing the humanity behind the surface of a routine encounter. The officer, while trying to maintain his professional stance, started to question his own behavior. He noticed the fairness of her answers, the politeness in her tone, and the quiet strength she displayed. There was a growing awareness that his initial perception had been shaped by unconscious bias, an assumption based solely on appearances rather than facts. The realization made him uncomfortable, but it was also a moment of learning, a recognition of the importance of approaching every individual with fairness and humility. Throughout this time, the garden seemed to act as a calming presence. The colors of the flowers, the careful arrangement of the plants, and the serene way the woman moved through her space created a contrast to the tension of the encounter. It reminded both the officer and the observing neighbors that everyday life carried beauty, and that moments of misunderstanding could be resolved through patience and dignity. The officer eventually handed back the documents, his demeanor softened. He spoke with a quieter voice, apologizing for the intrusion in a professional but sincere manner. The woman nodded, acknowledging the apology without any sign of resentment. Her ability to forgive quickly and continue her day's work reflected her strength of character and her understanding of human fallibility. As the officer stepped back, the interaction began to lose its tension. The woman resumed her gardening, placing each flower carefully, trimming the hedges with precision, and working as though the incident had been only a minor interruption. The officer lingered for a moment, reflecting on the brief encounter, and then returned to his car. The neighborhood, too, began to settle back into its usual rhythm, the quiet resuming its rightful place. The afternoon sun continued to cast a warm glow, highlighting the careful care put into the garden. Each plant seemed to thrive under the woman's attention, reflecting not only her skill but also her calm and thoughtful approach to life. The officer, meanwhile, began to understand that assumptions could be misleading, and that approaching others with respect was crucial, regardless of circumstances. The encounter left him thoughtful, aware that his role required constant self-reflection and humility. The scene ended quietly, yet its impact lingered. The woman's patience and composure had turned a potentially tense moment into a lesson in dignity and respect. The officer's awareness had grown, leaving him with a newfound understanding of human complexity and the importance of fairness. Though the neighborhood appeared unchanged, a subtle shift had occurred, both in the minds of those who observed and in the hearts of those directly involved. By the time the sun began to dip lower in the sky, the garden remained vibrant. The woman continued her work, and the officer drove slowly away, carrying the quiet lesson with him. The encounter, seemingly small and ordinary, had revealed truths about patience, respect, and the value of seeing people clearly before judging them. It was a reminder that even in routine moments, life could teach profound lessons if approached with care and attentiveness. In this way, the ordinary afternoon had become extraordinary, not through dramatic events, but through the quiet exchange between two people, each learning from the other. The garden flourished, the neighborhood remained peaceful, and both the woman and the officer carried forward the understanding that simple acts, thoughtful words, and patience could transform moments of tension into opportunities for reflection and growth. The sun was slowly moving toward the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the neighborhood. The woman continued to tend her garden, arranging flowers with a gentle care that spoke of experience and love for her home. Her hands moved deliberately, brushing the soil around each plant, pressing it down just enough to give the roots stability. She occasionally paused to step back and look at her work, smiling softly at the beauty of her small sanctuary. The quiet peace of the afternoon seemed to wrap around her, creating a calm bubble even as the officer lingered nearby. The officer had returned to his patrol car but had not yet left. He was sitting inside reviewing his thoughts over and over. Something about the situation refused to settle in his mind. He could not ignore the way the woman carried herself, the way she spoke, the way she seemed completely unfazed by his presence and by the attention of others. He realized he had been quick to assume things based on her appearance, and the weight of that thought made him uneasy. He took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts, and decided he needed to speak with her one more time, not just as an officer, but as someone trying to understand what had just happened. He stepped out of the car slowly, approaching her with a tone that was less formal now, almost hesitant. The woman looked up from her flowers and met his gaze. There was no anger, no impatience, only a calm curiosity that encouraged honesty and transparency. He swallowed his pride and spoke honestly, explaining that his initial approach was routine but that he now felt he may have misjudged the situation. He wanted to understand more, not to challenge her, but to learn and acknowledge the mistake he had almost made. The woman listened quietly, placing her hands on her hips for a moment, considering his words. She nodded gently, acknowledging the effort it took to admit fault. She did not raise her voice or show irritation, but her eyes held a quiet firmness. She told him that everyone could make assumptions, but the important thing was recognizing them and taking steps to correct them. Her words were simple, but carried a weight of experience and grace. It was a reminder that dignity and patience could transform moments of tension into opportunities for understanding. The officer, listening intently, felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment. He realized that he had underestimated her not because of what she was doing, but because of who he assumed she was. There was a moment of silence between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. The neighbors who had been watching quietly retreated to their own yards or homes, leaving the two of them in a private space of reflection. The street seemed quieter than ever, as if the world was giving them the time to understand each other. The woman resumed her work for a few minutes, moving slowly among the plants. She spoke lightly about the kinds of flowers she was planting and how each required a different type of care. She mentioned the mornings she spent preparing the soil, the afternoons she spent watering, and the satisfaction of seeing the blooms flourish over time. Her words painted a picture of routine and patience, a life devoted to simple yet meaningful work. The officer listened carefully, absorbing the normalcy of her life, realizing that his initial suspicion had been unnecessary. Then, almost casually, she mentioned who she was in the community. She did not say it with pride or force, only as if it was a simple fact of life. She explained that she had responsibilities and a role that many people admired, but that she also valued ordinary moments like these, where she could connect with her garden and her home. The words landed gently but firmly, and the officer froze for a moment, taking in the reality of the situation. The weight of his assumptions hit him fully now, and he understood the magnitude of his mistake. He swallowed hard, feeling a mix of shock and embarrassment. His face reddened slightly, and he felt a knot of regret form in his chest. The woman, noticing the change in his demeanor, did not make him feel worse. Instead, she maintained her calm composure, showing him that grace could be powerful without needing confrontation. Her quiet strength became even more evident, and it was clear that her presence carried both influence and humility. For a few moments, they stood in silence. The officer felt the reality of the situation settle into his mind. He had approached someone he assumed to be ordinary, perhaps even suspicious, and had learned that she was someone with significant standing and influence in the community. Yet what struck him most was not her title but her demeanor, how she handled the confrontation with patience, dignity, and calm confidence. It was a lesson he knew he would carry with him far beyond this afternoon. He finally spoke, his voice softer and more careful now. He apologized sincerely, explaining that he had acted based on routine and assumptions and that he now recognized the error in his judgment. The woman listened, nodding lightly, her expression steady and composed. She accepted his apology with grace, showing that accountability and forgiveness could coexist without anger or resentment. The tension that had been present earlier began to fade, replaced by a quiet understanding and respect. As the officer handed back her documents, he took a step back, no longer in control of the situation but willing to learn from it. The woman returned to her gardening, her movements fluid and relaxed, showing that the incident had not disturbed her peace. She planted each flower with care, pressing the soil gently, watering the roots carefully and adjusting the leaves to ensure they had room to grow. The beauty of the garden mirrored the quiet strength she had shown throughout the encounter. The neighbors who had observed from their homes or yards began to return to their own routines. Their curiosity satisfied, some whispered about the surprising turn of events, while others reflected on the grace and composure displayed by the woman. The officer, too, took a deep breath and watched her work from a distance, silently acknowledging the lesson he had received. It was clear that assumptions, no matter how routine, could be harmful and misleading, and that approaching others with patience and respect was essential. The garden itself seemed to embody the woman's spirit. Each flower stood upright, vibrant, and healthy, reflecting the care and attention she gave to her surroundings. The sun continued to move slowly across the sky, casting warm light that highlighted the colors of the blooms and the texture of the soil. Every small movement she made seemed intentional, thoughtful, and grounded in experience. It was a scene that radiated calm and patience, emphasizing the quiet power of ordinary acts performed with care. The officer remained nearby for a while longer, reflecting on what he had witnessed. He understood that his actions had consequences, and that even routine procedures required mindfulness and humility. The interaction had changed him, opening his eyes to the importance of seeing people fully before forming judgments. He felt a sense of gratitude for the opportunity to learn this lesson, even if it came through initial discomfort and embarrassment. The woman continued her work, occasionally pausing to water a new flower or trim a stray leaf. Her presence was serene yet powerful, a reminder that authority and dignity could exist without harsh words or aggressive behavior. She had handled the situation with skill, teaching a subtle but profound lesson in respect, patience, and human understanding. The officer felt humbled, aware that he had encountered someone who embodied grace under pressure, and he knew it would leave a lasting impression on him. As the afternoon waned, the street slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. Cars passed occasionally, neighbors resumed their routines, and the sun cast long shadows across the yards. Yet the memory of the confrontation remained, a small but significant reminder of the importance of humility and awareness. The woman's ability to maintain her composure, to respond with clarity and calm, had turned a potentially tense situation into a moment of understanding and reflection. By the time the sun began to set, the officer finally started to drive away. Glancing back at the garden one last time, he carried with him a new perspective, an understanding that assumptions could be misleading, and that respect and patience were more powerful than authority alone. The woman remained in her garden, continuing her work, each movement a testament to her character and quiet strength. The encounter, though brief, had created a profound lesson that neither would forget, and it had reminded the neighborhood that dignity and grace could be found in even the simplest of acts. The day was beginning to cool as the sun moved lower, sending soft shadows across the quiet street. The woman continued her work in the garden, her hands brushing gently against the petals and leaves, each movement showing the care and attention she devoted to her home. Her presence seemed to fill the space around her, radiating calmness and patience. Even after the initial confrontation, she maintained a steady rhythm, moving from one flower to the next with quiet determination. The small details of her work, the careful watering, the pruning of a stray branch, the placement of new plants, created a scene that was peaceful and full of life. The officer, still parked nearby, watched her for a few moments. The earlier tension had faded, replaced by a sense of reflection. He realized that he had been too quick to act on assumptions, and that the woman's calm responses had highlighted the importance of approaching situations with patience and respect. The weight of the moment pressed on him as he thought about the assumptions he had made, and he felt a genuine desire to learn from the encounter. He knew that this brief interaction would influence the way he handled similar situations in the future. After taking a deep breath, he stepped out of his car once again. This time, his approach was measured, deliberate, and devoid of the earlier tension. The woman looked up from her garden and gave a polite nod. There was no anger, no sense of holding a grudge, only a quiet acknowledgement of his presence. He spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully, apologizing for his earlier behavior and explaining that his assumptions had been unfounded. He admitted that he had acted hastily and without considering the full context of the situation. The woman listened quietly, her hands resting lightly on her hips as she absorbed his words. She nodded slowly, a small smile forming on her lips. She explained that mistakes were a part of life, and that what mattered most was recognizing them and taking responsibility. Her voice was calm, gentle, yet firm, carrying a sense of wisdom and experience that made the apology feel complete. She did not dwell on the mistake. Instead, she used the moment to reinforce a lesson in respect, patience, and understanding. The officer felt a wave of relief, mixed with lingering embarrassment. He realized that the woman's composure had allowed him to reflect on his actions without judgment. He had expected anger or frustration, but instead he found grace and humility. He nodded, acknowledging her words, and promised to approach future encounters with more care and awareness. The sincerity in his voice reflected his genuine desire to learn and to do better. For a few minutes they stood in silence, the garden around them serving as a quiet witness to the moment. The officer's attention shifted to the flowers, the neatly trimmed hedges, and the care that went into every detail of the garden. He began to understand the depth of her character, not just in her role in the community, but in the way she lived her life, treating each small act with thoughtfulness and care. The contrast between her composed presence and the officer's earlier assumptions highlighted the importance of humility and awareness in every interaction. The woman returned to her gardening, continuing her work with the same focus and care as before. She spoke lightly about the plants, sharing details about the blooms, the soil, and the time it took to cultivate such a garden. Her words were simple, yet they painted a vivid picture of dedication and attention to detail. The officer listened, absorbing both the information and the underlying lesson about patience, respect, and the importance of observing before judging. Neighbors who had been watching from their homes or yards began to retreat to their routines. Some whispered to one another, commenting on the surprising turn of events. Others reflected quietly, taking note of the grace and composure displayed by the woman. The officer, too, felt the eyes of the community, but he no longer felt tension or pressure. Instead, he felt a sense of responsibility and a growing awareness of the role of fairness and respect in his actions. He spoke again, this time more casually, asking about the flowers and the garden's upkeep. The woman responded with warmth and patience, explaining the different types of plants, their care requirements, and the joy she found in tending to them. Her words carried a subtle authority, not in a commanding way, but in a way that reflected experience and knowledge. The officer realized that learning often came from unexpected places, and that moments like these could be profoundly educational if approached with an open mind. The conversation, though brief, created a quiet bridge between them. The officer's initial mistake had transformed into a moment of reflection and growth. He felt humbled, yet grateful for the opportunity to witness the woman's calm strength and to learn from her approach. Her ability to maintain composure under scrutiny had revealed a depth of character that could not be judged by appearances alone. It was a reminder that patience, dignity, and understanding often carried more weight than authority or assumptions. The afternoon continued to fade into evening, and the woman's garden seemed to glow under the soft light. Each flower, each leaf reflected the care and attention she had given them over time. The officer remained nearby for a few more moments, taking in the scene and reflecting on the lessons he had learned. He understood that assumptions could lead to mistakes, but humility and openness could transform those mistakes into opportunities for growth. The woman's quiet strength left a lasting impression on him. He felt a sense of responsibility, not just in his professional duties, but in the way he approached people in everyday life. The encounter had taught him the importance of seeing beyond the surface, of listening, observing, and treating everyone with respect. It was a lesson that he knew would guide his actions moving forward, shaping his interactions in ways he had not anticipated.